So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's really great to have so much buzz in the room because that means we're doing exactly what we're here to do, which is to know each other, to connect, to learn from one another. So to me, that's a great sign, and hopefully we'll continue to do that throughout the day today. So my name is Sister Tracey Horan. I'm a Sister of Providence of St. Mary of the Woods, Indiana, and also a community organizer with Faith in Indiana, which is an affiliate of the Faith in Action National Network. So it's really great to be here with you all. Actually, just last night, Father Chris and I had a meeting with our accompaniment team, so I feel like, this is kind of ongoing caucusing and learning from each other, which is great. And what I'm going to invite each of our panelists for this panel, which talks about mobilizing with the immigrant community across difference, is to actually share a story of something in their work that has happened over the past year, a powerful example of how we've been able to uphold immigrants' or refugees' rights. Because we heard this morning that stories are really what animates us. And I believe that deeply as someone who's rooted in faith-based organizing, where we, from our traditions and the stories of those traditions, we're drawn forth to act. So I'll just share, for me, I've been in organizing for the past couple of years, and I've had a number of different things that have drawn me into this work. And one of them was a moment of disruption for me. I lived at the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas for a couple of years. So shout out to the Sisters of Charity. I saw some of you in the room today. Lived with a group of Sisters of Charity there. And about a third of my students lived in Juarez, Mexico, and crossed the border each day to come to school. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana originally, and so for me this was a totally different context. And October of my first year teaching, one day one of my 8th graders just didn't show up for school, and we didn't know why. And throughout the day, I learned that her siblings didn't show up either. And so we were all, the teachers, just kind of asking questions, and finally we learned through the grapevine that there had been a car bomb in front of her house in Mexico, and that they had to flee. And so I was faced with, in my classroom, this empty chair, day after day, just wondering what was happening to her and her family, not knowing if they were okay. And it was the first time I really had to start grappling with those questions. Why is this happening? Why is this okay? Why aren't we doing more? Why didn't I know that this is something that's going on? And thankfully, she and her family did return, but it was something that it kind of shifted something in me to start really paying more attention. And so I want to introduce our panel, and I'll just share briefly about each person and then invite them to share a story, a little bit more about who they are, what they do, and hopefully a story of hope, that we can see the real work that's being done and how people coming together can have an impact. So we have first Karina Barrias, who is a native of Guatemala and co-founder and current executive director for La Casita Center, which is in Louisville, Kentucky. So she's going to tell us a little more about the community of Latino hospitality that exists there that they have created. And then next to her, we have Antonio Fernandez, who has dual nationality in Spain and Mexico and is part of the Community Learning Center Institute team, who became the director of the International Welcome Center in 2016 and works with legal services here in the greater Cincinnati area. So we welcome you, Antonio. And then we have Allison Hari, who is an immigration attorney and immigrant legal services director. She leads a team of legal advocates at Catholic Charities in Southwest Ohio in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. So welcome, Allison. And we welcome Terry Morris Downs, a personal friend of mine, who is also the executive director of the Immigrant Welcome Center in Indianapolis and has been the director since its inception about 10 years ago. And Father Chris Waddleton, who is pastor at St. Philip Neri Catholic Church in Indianapolis, an engineer turned Franciscan turned diocesan priest, who will share about his time ministering with the Latino community over the past 10 years. So I'll invite each person, and we'll start over here with Karina to share a little bit more about the work that they do briefly, and then one example of a powerful collaborative mobilization effort to uphold immigrant and refugee rights over the past year. So we'll start with you, Karina.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
I am so blessed and privileged to be part of La Casita Center, which is a community of Latinx hospitality. As Jesus Ibanez just mentioned, we use the term Latinx, so it's non-gender conforming, and so everybody feels included. So part of the work that we've been doing through the years with La Casita has been trying to accompany Latinx families in our city. How we came about to be, we were a group of women that were doing domestic violence, sexual assault, and what we know as now as trafficking work in our city and our state. What happened back in the day is that most of the women that we were accompanying, they were not eligible for any housing benefits, even if they had 10 US citizen kids. So their options were limited, as you can imagine, going back to the person that perpetrated them, get another partner, or be homeless. With that, we founded Casa Latina, which is our hospitality house, and then after that, La Casita came about. So I can tell so many stories of hope, but what I can say in reality is that we want to say to the community that we accompany and the community that allows us and gives us the permission to be part of their lives, that the hope comes in the daily accompaniment, in the consistency and the presence of every day. It goes beyond of any policies and procedures, any report, any big presentation that we can do, because most of the people that we accompany have so many struggles, and the mobilizing that happens within those communities doesn't happen through an email, doesn't happen through TV, doesn't happen through the newspaper. It happens on one-on-one. I see you, I am here, I am ready to listen. So with the work that we started with women that had survived domestic violence and sexual assault, they gave us a very valuable lesson, and it was that we didn't know it all. As a Latina, as a non-indigenous Latina, somebody that came with the privilege of having documents, even though I came from a very poor area in Guatemala City, I learned through my sisters that I didn't know it all, that I didn't have those answers. So the story of hope comes whenever we are ready to listen. Research won't tell us. People that think they know better won't tell us. Somebody beautifully said, where is everybody that is supposed to be at the table? For us to do that, it will be very important that we really invite them and make it accessible. So our story at La Casita is whenever we open the doors for indigenous women that barely speak Spanish, for families whose parents or breadwinners don't read and write in any language. Whenever we make transportation accessible and you see other women that don't read and write teaching other women that don't read and write how to take the bus. So, it's not something that has been built in a year. It has been built for years through little by little accompanying each other and sharing with each other our stories and listening. Something that we are very intentional about the work that we do at La Casita is that we refuse to become an institution. When people come to see us, we just open the door. Like if you have ever been at a Latino house, food will be offered. Practically tell you, eat even if you are not hungry. So that's how we go about. It's welcoming everybody beyond class, beyond race, beyond academic status, beyond color, beyond, even within us Latinos, we have so many prejudices that we learn, and we learn really well from our colonizers, and that we learned really well when we came to mainstream US. So The hope it is in all those children that are learning better than we did. It's going through, our youth that has getting so beautifully organized for Occupy ICE, and they are right there in front of everybody. That is the hope. When we make everybody part of the movement that we're doing, not in status, not in patriarchy style, not in hierarchy style, but in a feminist model where everybody counts.
Thank you so much, Karina. Yeah. And as a relational organizer, I can especially appreciate the fact that you mentioned that accompaniment does not happen via email. We're talking about relationship. Thank you. So Antonio, I would invite you to share a few minutes about your work and a story of hope.
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone. Antonio Fernandez, director of the Roberts Welcome Center, where we have the Immigrant and Refugee Law Center. Just as Karina said, there is especially nowadays a need for a lot of our immigrant families to be heard, to be helped, but to be part of their life. And I totally agree with what she said. I see that the need is there to be heard. So I'm gonna share with you a quick story. Some of you already heard. I see some people here in the audience that already heard this story, but it's very impactful. It was very impactful to me and had a lot of impact in the work that we do every day. And in this family from Honduras, we're located at the Community Learning Center. So we're located at the Cincinnati Public School called Roberts Academy. And we offer so many classes for families. And during English class, one of our very good students was just off track that day. I was able to take a moment to talk to her, and I asked what was going on, and she said, well, I know my children are coming from Honduras. I haven't seen them in 8 years, and I'm panicking. I don't know what to do. They took that decision on their own. They're coming, and I don't know what to do, and I fear for their life. So she just told me that. Minutes later, through text, she found out that they were leaving Honduras. Then she spent most of the day there with us, just wondering where they could be. She wanted to find ways to track them, and well, that didn't happen. Once they left, they were off the radar. Finally, 8 days later, 8 days went by after phone calls and many texts, and we figured out that they made it to the border. So it was moment for them to go across the border and hopefully be reunited with mom after 8 years. They were in Texas. They were separated. Immigration separated these two siblings. One was 16, one was 14. They don't speak, obviously, any English. They don't know where they're at. They don't have the right paperwork. And the oldest sibling is treated as an adult, so he's been taken to jail. What the younger sibling describes is that he was just asked to come for a few minutes. They were going to ask him a few questions. He never came back. So the only communication that mom has is with this 14-year-old, which is trying to describe what's going on. She's destroyed. She's just sad. I mean, she went through a really rough time doing the same. So now she's reliving that through her children. So couldn't find him. He wasn't on the system. It happened to be that those days were when we were looking for him. It's when the government had that, they stopped working for a few days. So there was no way to track him. I just can't imagine, well, I can, but I can't, just to be day and night thinking about my children and not knowing where they are at. So it was just too hard. After 4 days, we figured out that he was taken as an adult, so he was in a jail for adults. I was able to speak to an agent and explain. He didn't really believe me. He's like, no, he's an adult, but we will see what we can do. A few hours later, he was released and sent back to a detention center. So at least the siblings were together, and we were able to communicate with them. To don't make the story long, after that, well, from that moment, 3 months went by, and finally we were able to see reunited this family. So but, I mean, along the process, you can imagine how many tears, how many moments of panic and despair went by. But now they're together. They're our students, and that story really impacted the work we do, and it was amazing to see that. I mean, it's not easy, but if you work hard, hand to hand, and you work just like Karina said, you listen to the story, you are there for these families, things can happen, and that has inspired the work we do every day so far.
Thank you so much, Antonio. And now, Allison, I invite you. Yes.
Thank you, Sister Tracey, and thank you all for being here today. I'm Allison Hurry. I'm from Catholic Charities of Greater Cincinnati, Southwestern Ohio, and a lot of the work that we do at Catholic Charities is informed by our discipleship and adherence to the gospel in terms of Jesus' message of welcoming our neighbors. Now, back in 2014, when a lot of unaccompanied immigrant children were coming to the United States through Central America up through Mexico, Catholic Charities and the greater Cincinnati area saw a giant influx of immigrants and children who were unaccompanied. And that served as the basis for Catholic Charities opening the Immigration Legal Services Department and providing legal services to immigrant children. I have a client story that I'd like to share with you today about a client who I'm going to call Juan. And Juan came to us from Guatemala. He was 17 when he left Guatemala, but he was 15 when he was living on the streets in Guatemala City without any parental supervision. He would work on the streets selling tamales. Some nights he would be able to sleep on his employer's floor at home, but most nights he slept on the streets. And when he was on the streets, he was robbed and beaten and harassed by the older children who were also living on the streets at that time. Juan was able to make enough money to save up and for the journey to come to the United States, and where he reunited with his sister. And today, Juan is very anxiously awaiting his green card. He was approved for special immigrant juvenile status and will eventually be able to get a green card or lawful permanent residence and stay in the United States permanently, which I think is a beautiful story and a testament to the human spirit, because Juan could have gone a very different path. He could have succumbed to the gang violence in Guatemala City. He could have been recruited into the gangs in Guatemala City. He could still be living on his family's very small farm in Guatemala, working the earth to provide food for the family in Guatemala. But he's not. He's here in the United States because he made that journey. He made that choice. And as a social service agency that provides services to immigrants and refugees throughout the greater Cincinnati area, we have multiple organizations within Catholic Charities that provide these services. We have the Su Casa Hispanic Center. Giovanna Alvarez is here today from the Su Casa Hispanic Center. She's the director. We also have our Refugee Resettlement Program, and Annie Scheid is here from the Refugee Resettlement Program. So if you have questions about those departments that I'm not going to be able to answer up here today, please do find them after this panel and talk to them about what we do, because they'll have a much better understanding of what we do than I can probably give in this 5-minute introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. And Terry.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Terry Morris Downs, and I'm Executive Director of the Immigrant Welcome Center. We're a nonprofit organization that helps to connect immigrants and refugees to people, places, opportunities, and resources in Indianapolis to help them build successful lives in our city. We also work with Welcoming America to help build Indianapolis as a welcoming and inclusive community that values and respects everyone. We have worked in this space for more than 10 years. We actually started the Immigrant Welcome Center through the mayor's office in Indianapolis 12 years ago, but we became our own 501c3 nonprofit organization 10 years ago. And in that time, I personally have seen Indianapolis grow far more respectful of immigrant communities and understanding everyone is a human being, and everyone deserves that respect. And so when we were starting the Immigrant Welcome Center, and I was the only employee, and I would go from place to place, you know, talking about why we needed an Immigrant Welcome Center in Indianapolis. And so many times, you know, the first response was, "You're not helping illegals, are you?" And I just never hardly hear that anymore. Of course, you know, I do a lot of community presentations, and of course, there's always one in every group that's got to ask me that question. But by and large, I have to say that I have felt that as we get to know immigrants and refugees as friends, as neighbors, as human beings with very similar goals and ambitions and dreams, they seem far more human and not quite as scary. And so just from my perspective, I wanted to start with that. Of course, after President Trump was elected, you know, we saw a lot of people who were much more vocal in why they wanted Indianapolis not to be so welcoming. And so efforts were really ramped up at that time to help people and to help immigrants and refugees most especially. We started a coalition that we call COIN. It's an acronym for Coalition for Our Immigrant Neighbors, and it consists of many immigrant and refugee serving organizations in Indianapolis, legal services, some social service agencies, some employers of companies that hire large amounts of immigrants and refugees. And so we started doing a lot of training with the ACLU of Indiana. Katie Blair is here with us today. Hi, Katie. And the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. I know we have representation here, but from the Indianapolis, just to be able to help immigrants and refugees understand what their rights are, what their constitutional rights are. And then also we moved into family safety planning so that we made sure everybody had a legal power of attorney and also the paperwork for temporary guardianship if they had U.S.-born children in the United States. So we worked very hard along those lines, but what we also found was that we had a huge influx in the number of what I call white allies who were calling us and saying, "What do you need me to do? I'm happy to write a check. I don't speak any other languages, but this issue has really come to the forefront. And I realize I've been silent too long, so how can I help you? How can I help my immigrant sisters and brothers?" So and this was mainly through the faith communities in Indianapolis, many schools and businesses and others all kind of coming together in groups and saying, we want to do something. So we started monthly distribution events where we would collect household items, baby supplies, toiletries, all sorts of things, and then use these volunteers and people who helped us to gather these items to go into immigrant or refugee communities in apartment complexes or places of worship and help distribute that. And it was a wonderful way for us to say, you are welcome here and you are our neighbor. And we had a group of Jewish women through Hadassah who handwrote the most beautiful notes, hundreds and hundreds of them, saying, you are welcome here and we want you to know that we consider you our neighbor and we want to be able to help you succeed here. And so we would hand those out at these distribution events to our immigrant and refugee clients who were attending. And at one of them, we were concentrating on various refugee or immigrant groups. At one of them, we had we were helping the Syrian refugees. Of course, we're not really receiving Syrian refugees in Indianapolis anymore, but at the time, we were receiving them pretty steadily. And I saw a friend of mine from my church, Little Flower on the east side, and I went over. I'm like, Tricia, what are you doing here? And she said, I never would have been able to meet a Syrian refugee if I wouldn't have come today. And I wanted to be able to meet someone from Syria and tell them that I was glad that they were part of the United States now, because I felt like they had such a hard time when they came here, especially in the state of Indiana when Mike Pence was governor and was trying to ban all Muslims from being resettled into the state of Indiana. So lots of stories of help and inclusion and welcoming. I'll go on about other things, but I just want to wrap it up and say also, I know across the United States you've seen these welcoming signs that say in 3 languages, no matter where you're from, we're glad that you're our neighbor. They were started by the Mennonite Church, but I called some Mennonite friends of mine to see if I could steal the idea and turned it into a fundraiser for the Immigrant Welcome Center. We did ours in red, white, and blue in the languages of Spanish, English, and Arabic, and sold about 1,000 signs and made about $13,000 for that. That really helped, and it just warms my heart completely to drive around Indianapolis and to see these yard signs all over Indianapolis. So anyway.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you. I could go on forever, as you can tell.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Father Chris Waddleton. I'm pastor of St. Philip Neary Church on the Near East side of Indianapolis. The advocacy or the accompaniment program has been a big part of the community's work for the last couple of years, working a lot with IndyCan or Faith in Indiana doing that. My community is about 75% Hispanic. Through a merger of 2 parishes, we have 2 schools. One of the schools with 300 students is 99% Hispanic children. The other one is about 35% Hispanic and growing in the Hispanic community. So immigration and what is happening in the country right now is very directly impacting my community. And so I appreciate seeing everybody here and working together and collaborating. The first story of an immigrant being detained was probably about 8 years ago at my former parish. And it was a bit of a rare thing then, and we were surprised, and so a lot of people kind of started learning at that point what was happening. Unfortunately, now it's not uncommon, and pretty much every week I hear a story of somebody who's been stopped and detained without a driver's license, or has fears at work, or something like that. The story I'd like to expand on a little more is a story about a young lady named Erica. Erica came to the United States when she was 5 years old. That was 30 years ago, and formed a life here, was married, has 2 children, and about 11 years ago, she went back to Mexico to a grandmother's funeral, and coming back was stopped at the border and detained, but released, and so came back to Indiana, where she continued living with her husband and formed the life together. On March 21st, her husband was detained in front of their house at 6 in the morning, a very common story, probably. They show up before work. But through a series of deception and lies, she was also detained. And so when she came to the door and asked what was going on, the ICE agent said, "We're detaining your husband." She asked why, and they said, "Because he's here illegally." A few minutes later, they said, "Why don't you come out and get his cell phone, his wallet, and his keys?" And so she did, and they grabbed her and said, "We've got another one." She told the agent she had 2 children still inside to sleep, and they said, "Well, call your family, call somebody to come care for them, because you're going with us." And so she called a babysitter at 6 o'clock in the morning. The babysitter came over, and then they took them both away. Thankfully, they did release her because she convinced them that, she had 2 young children, an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. I say a series of deceptions and lies because throughout her ICE check-ins, ICE portrayed themselves as friends, as social workers. We're here to help you transition to your new life. And with a lack of solid information, it took several weeks before it became clear that their full intention was that she was going to be deported. Her husband was never released from detention, was deported about 5 weeks later, was sent to Reynosa, Mexico, where he had some family. But then over the next couple of months, again, this started the end of March, and we're just here in the middle of July. She had a number of ICE check-ins and gatherings or meetings with them, and it became very clear that there was no other option except she was going to be deported. And so she tried to get everything in order, making the decisions whether the children, naturally born citizens here, were going to go with her or stay here in Indiana with grandparents or family. The decision was made to take them back. The advocacy or the accompaniment program was beautiful to see because people from all faith traditions rallied around her. She became kind of a public figure with news articles in the Catholic newspaper and the local media and the television. It even made national news on a couple of occasions, some of the accompaniment efforts. I don't know that it helped her case. Somebody in the first panel mentioned how sometimes public media causes harsher treatment, and so we don't know if that was actually the case or not, but it brought a lot of people together in Indianapolis around Erica because it was such a good story. There was no criminal background, no reason other than coming into the country without proper documentation was the reason she was being deported. There was a garage sale to sell off a lot of her stuff, and people were stopping by who had no intention of buying anything, but they just left money. They said, I wanted to meet Erica, and here's $20 to help you. You know, we feel so terrible about what's happening to you. We want to support you. And so there was a tremendous community support and effort. About 3 weeks ago, she was given a date that she had to leave by June 27th, and so that was her deport date. And so she decided that she was going to drive back to Mexico with as much stuff as she could in her minivan. And about 3 weeks before her departure date, about a week before her departure date, the person who was going to drive her to Mexico was no longer able to do that because she doesn't have a driver's license. And so my niece and I volunteered to drive her back to Mexico. And we did that for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to experience it directly. To see what was happening at the border, to kind of experience this deportation firsthand. The second reason was there was a very direct need to bring her back. What I learned from that was the fear that our immigrants live with. I wasn't sure if I was on the right side of the law in doing this, because there was just not proper documentation. There was not a lot of things in place to make this happen. There was tremendous frustration. ICE was a block at every turn. There were outright lies. There was intentional lack of information. There were threats and intimidation made along the way. There were police called on us when we came to accompany her to the ICE check-in office, and we were cited with trespassing. Myself and our Archbishop of Indianapolis, the Episcopal Bishop in Indianapolis, were all cited for trespassing because we were accompanying her. And so there was just tremendous frustration and fear. There was also, at the time, not a lot of hope, at least immediate hope for a change in her situation. The positives were for Erica that there was a community supporting her. At the end of it, when she was asked what was the most important part of the accompaniment, she said it was the spiritual and emotional support there. There was a community standing around her, helping her. There were advocates helping her with paperwork and trying to figure out what you do with power of attorneys and temporary custody for the children, and how do you rent your house, and how do you sell your cars, and things like this, all the things that a family that's being deported after 30 years needs to face. The story also changed the hearts of thousands of people. The story of Erica was reached by more than 150,000 people in Indianapolis through social media and the news, and so I think it really changed a lot of hearts and galvanized the community around somebody who is so unjustly being removed from our country. So the accompaniment, the stories being shared, are making positive impacts. In the short term, it may not feel like it because it's in a bit of an uphill battle, but in the long term, the more hearts that change, the more change we can make.
Thank you, Father Chris. So I appreciate each of you for really grounding us in why we're here, and I'm finding that as it seems like things are difficult and there's lots of reasons to despair, it's more and more important for me to remember every day why I'm here, why I'm doing this work. And we also heard lifted up, some people touched on collaborations across difference. And we've heard that a little bit this morning, how important it is to be working across background, across discipline, across race, denomination, to uphold the rights of immigrants and refugees. And so now I'm going to invite each person to just share briefly, maybe in 2 minutes, about that. And I'll just mention before we go on that we are going to have a segment toward the end of this panel for questions. So if you want to just kind of keep in mind as you're listening, if something strikes you, we're a learning community here today, to think about that and to write that down. And I'll invite folks to come forward when we get closer to that part, to come up to this microphone if you want to address a question either to the entire panel or to someone in particular. So just keep that in mind. And so let's change it up a little bit. Antonio, maybe we can start with you for this question. An impact that you've seen in people working across difference, so whether it's across discipline or background, denomination, or race, and something that's been powerful in your experience about that.
Well, I believe the main impact is being a voice for our families, for these families that are here going through this really rough time. They feel that they have no rights, they feel that they're never heard, and they feel that they just need to live hiding from everything. So empowering families to be able to live a life, live a normal life, to go to the grocery store without worrying if you're going to be detained or separated, or you will never see your husband when he goes to work. So the main impact that I have seen is all these families coming to our law center and just opening up and going to school and feeling safe. And I feel that safety, it's been key for our families at least to feel that they have a life. They're coming from horrible backgrounds, the majority of these families, and they have gone through really, really rough situations. So they think that this is going to be over here, and it hasn't been. It's you start a new chapter and a different place with a different language, with no really many friends or help. So in some way you become that for these families. You become that help, you become that voice, and just empowering families is the biggest impact I see. Just empowering, listening, and walk with them hand to hand through this battle.
Thank you. Allison, is there an example you'd like to share?
Sure. I know the last panel someone mentioned the Keep Families Together rallies that happened across the country. One of the things that's really struck me about the last 2 years in my professional career and as a member of American society is the number of, and I'll use Terry's terminology, white allies that I've seen coming forward. After the election in 2016 and after the inauguration in January of 2017, Catholic Charities received an outpour of volunteerism and donations, all directed towards the immigration services, the refugee services that we provide. So, it's really striking to me how important and how impactful media images have been, and the stories of immigrants in the community. And while I, as an attorney, I kind of tend to agree with Heather that, as a practitioner, putting your client's stories out there is a scary thing to do, but I also see the value in it and recognize that there is value in more people becoming aware and listening to the stories of immigrants, making it more relatable to their own lives. It's one thing to say, oh, the government's separating children from the border. It's another thing to be a parent watching a child bawling its eyes out because its mother is not there. On Saturday, I was, I don't know if Katie Kirsch is here right now, but I was looking at Katie Kirsch's Facebook, and she posted this video of a family, or of a letter being read by celebrities, a letter of a mother being read by celebrities. And usually I try to avoid that kind of thing on my off time, but I actually watched it. And for me, as someone who works in this field on a daily basis, I sat on my kitchen floor and I cried because it was so hard to watch. Having those stories get out into the community, making it touch other people's lives, I think that's really the real value in collaborating with other organizations, because, you know, Catholic Charities, we know what's going on with our clients' lives. We don't necessarily know what's going on with the clients who are going to the law center at Roberts Academy. But having that communication and the openness between our organizations to talk about what things are we seeing in the community, that enables us as advocates, as social service providers, to actually make an impact and, you know, address those issues for our clients.
Thank you. Terry?
Well, as I had mentioned earlier, we really ramped up our efforts with many of our community partners through COIN, the Coalition for Our Immigrant Neighbors, in doing Know Your Rights and family safety planning. And I also want to acknowledge that the Mexican Consulate's office is here too. Mariana Torres and I worked on those together, and we were able to do that at the Mexican Consulate office in Indianapolis on Saturdays several times as well. So in addition to that, we were also part, and I'm sure the Mexican Consulate and the ACLU and many others were part of a Indiana Alliance Against Hate. And this started by the Fair Housing Association of Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana, because Indiana is one of 5 states nationally that does not have any hate crimes legislation. And we felt that working across both immigrant and refugee communities, as well as LGBTQ communities and others who might face hate crimes in the state of Indiana, would be another effective way of advocating on behalf of the families that we serve. So we had worked on that and done several rallies throughout Indianapolis in trying to affect change in our legislation. We were not successful this year, but I feel like we brought much more attention to the issue of the fact that Indiana has no hate crimes legislation, and through some funding, national funding, we also have now, through this Central Indiana Alliance Against Hate, are tracking incidents of hate-related crimes, or even just hate speech, so that we can show our legislators that it does occur in Indiana. Of course, we had no data, so they were all saying it doesn't happen in Indiana. Well, right, of course it doesn't. So we felt like, okay, we've got to collect data, and we have to show them the prevalence of it. And so we have also been working with law enforcement so that they can also mark that down. But I feel like that is something that we're working on, and have built really strong coalitions across party lines and across ethnicities and social issues, in being able to bring about change there.
Thank you, Terry. Father Chris?
I think one of the more powerful impacts I've seen, divided into 2 groups. One is for the activists and those who are speaking up and doing things. I think there's a real sense that we're on the right side of God's law at this time. And it's the gospel alive, and it's bringing people together from all faith traditions, from Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, all kind of with a common cause. And the common cause is to the dignity of people, God's law, and upholding that. And we've really is kind of galvanized that again. It's brought people together. So I see a very strong impact in that. Brought a whole group of people to the talk and the conversation that were not involved before. And so I see a real impact in that, and hopefully that will continue to go into the future. For our immigrant communities, it's the sense that they're not standing alone, that a lot of people are there with them for a number of reasons, primarily out of fear. They're not able to come to gatherings like this, or don't feel like they are empowered to do so. And so, but knowing that the clergy and the leaders in their community that's there with them are holding them up and doing what they can for them, there's a tremendous strength in that. And so being on the right side of God, living the gospel in a very concrete way as it hits the streets, and also allowing people to feel like they're not standing alone are two impacts that are very, very powerful.
Thank you, Father Chris. And Karina?
So before our new government, part of the accompaniments that we had at La Casita, we used to go and visit the very poor trailer parks, the areas that are very poor in our city, especially whenever somebody will come forward and said, you know, ICE has been visiting us at 6 in the morning, or they've been knocking at doors on Saturdays afternoons, so what do we do? So before this current government, we will gather as many people as we could, immigration attorneys, you know, the police they were very interested in coming and tell the community back in the day that they were not the ones knocking on the door, they were not the ones detaining people, and you know, community faith leaders, and we will go, and if you have ever been in Latin America where the only way to call people to the main plaza has been through a drum and saying, come and join us. Well, that's what we used to do. Mm-hmm. So we will bring tamales, we will bring food, and you know, just have a very informal gathering saying, telling people about what their rights were, about the services and different things that were available in the community. Fast forward, new government, very dangerous. So this group that it's an organism, it's not an organization, it's a network, it's something that flows and grows by the day. We decided to call it Alerta Roja, the red alert. So with this, it's just a community of different individuals, organisms, organizations that are very interested in accompanying the communities that are being affected the most. So what happens today after 2 years? Has it been 2 years already? Mm-hmm. 2 years. It is that we have a 24-hour hotline. I'm telling all of these with no funding, all of these with the help of volunteers and different people that want to help. We have an intervention team that is coordinated by Louisville Standing Up for Racial Justice, and I have to read it because I usually just call it El-Search, the El-Searches. So what they do is that, you know, we invite people, white allies that want to be in the training, and what they do, if somebody calls the hotline, these individuals go to the place where ICE is raiding. But not only that, it goes beyond that. It goes to the point that we usually need transportation. We need childcare. We are seeing more and more families where they take the breadwinner and they leave one of the parents with the kids. How are they going to work if usually this parent is left behind with an ankle bracelet? So you know what the Alerta Roja intervention does is supporting us in the day-to-day crisis that happens to our communities. We also were approached by El-Search, and they were the very first one that asked us, what do you need from us? How can we help you? Also, one local Catholic church, St. William's Catholic Church, they came to us and they said, oh my God, your Crazy Tuesday, how do you survive your Crazy Tuesday at La Casita? And we were like, we don't know. I mean, we cannot figure it out. So they provided us with 1 year of funding for a full-time staff, and also to pay injustice to one of our staff members who was working already 50, 60 hours. I was being paid only for 30. So after that year was over, little by little, within Alerta Roja and everybody, all our allies, the Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Justice started, you know, to be created and start the journey, and it is today that ICIJ continues supporting, giving La Casita that financial support. So in that way, we are able to have free legal clinics, to have a staff person that can accompany people through their legal process as well. We have also, and I'm also glad that Mariana is here, we have also created a wonderful partnership with the Mexican consulate. They have providing us resources for us to provide free legal clinics, workshops to not only Mexican nationals, to the ones that want to attend to the workshops. Also, the ACLU, and last but not least, Mi Gente, which has been so instrumental in including, as I said before, the youth in our city and in our nation, to be frank with you, to be part of this movement. So, there has been a lot of people that have come and approached us, but I think that for me, the richest part is that we have been approached by people that really care. We have been also be approached by other people that really care, but that they want to tell us how to do things and how they think we should help all those very poor Latinos over there. But there have been others that really want to hear what is being needed, what we are listening to, what people really want to do with our lives, even if it's something that we think it's not the right thing to do, or the mainstream thing to do, or the systematic things to do, or the white thing to do, but it's the thing that they want to do with their lives. So it has been very powerful. As part of the member of La Casita, I really feel very, very, very lucky to witness something that we dreamt before this administration, to have an organism of beautiful group of people that even if we don't agree in everything, we work together for the community.
Thank you so much, Karina. And I love the way that you describe that as an organism, that really people were just coming together organically. I think that's so beautiful. And I'll just share briefly, I think there's a lot of reasons it's been powerful to see people come together across difference over the past couple of years. One of the things, a couple people have lifted up: accompaniment work, rapid response work, and hotlines. And for us, a lot of our leaders in this work are undocumented. And so there are folks that, I wouldn't ask to show up at court or to show up at the ICE office. And of course, we don't prevent them, but just really being aware of that reality. So having people, having conversations with someone who calls and says, I'd really like to be accompanied to court, but I don't have any family members who are documented, and I don't want to go alone. And so that has been a powerful moment for others to kind of step in places where that's really needed. And a moment that I really hold in my heart, in March, we had a civil disobedience, 19 people committed civil disobedience the day after the deadline for the DREAM Act, from 5 different denominations, and we had labor leaders as well participating in that in Indianapolis. And we linked arms across the street, and we were singing and chanting different things. And there was a moment when it got quiet, people kind of finished that chant, waiting for something else. And there was a young African-American woman who was just standing on the corner, and she just started yelling, "Don't deport our immigrants," over and over. And it came from this deep place inside of her. And she was like right in front of me. And there was something about that, the way that she was, this communal ownership of like, these are our people, like we're in this together, that was really beautiful to me. And I think I've seen that as well in our national work and thinking about our Live Free work around mass incarceration and violence against Black people, coming together with our immigration work, and how this is really one story of people of color being criminalized. How can we acknowledge those links? So I appreciate all of you for kind of lifting up the power of working together around those things. So we'll ask each panelist to share on one more question, and then we'll move into taking questions from you all. So, thinking about, we're here in this room in this moment, and all of us know there are things coming up. There are elections, there are campaigns, things that are happening. And so we want to ask, what, for you, for your organization, for your people, what are the priorities that are on the horizon? What are the things that are up front for you? And what are the challenges you foresee in really building this work around those priorities? And so I'll ask Allison to answer this question first, and then we'll go through.
Sure. And I think this is a great opportunity to talk about a lot of the things that Catholic Charities has been doing and will continue to do, because we have a strong commitment to serving the immigrant populations, the refugee populations, and just generally the most vulnerable individuals in Cincinnati. So from the Sukasa Hispanic Center, one of the things that came out of this general community fear that we've been noticing across the board is that we have caseworkers that now go to different apartment complexes throughout the Cincinnati area where we know are strong Latino and immigrant populations, and they hold basically office hours. They will help people get their kids enrolled in school, help them apply for vouchers or cupones. They will help them, access other services in the community. And I think that's really helpful for immigrants to feel safe in where they are getting the help, because it's actually in their own home. It's in their community. It's not necessarily they're going to an office and it's a sterile environment. And so that's one of the things that Sukasa has been doing in the last year or so, has been going out and doing more community outreach. In my legal department, we do Know Your Rights presentations at churches, at schools, different community areas throughout the city. I've also started doing what's known as Protecting Your Neighbor presentations, so more geared towards non-immigrant allies who are interested in what they can do to protect another immigrant. It's usually centered around know your rights and understanding the rights that people have in the United States, and activating people to understand and accept what responsibilities they have in terms of exercising those rights. Another thing that we do is the Refugee Resettlement Agency has started doing emergency services, and they have 2 days a week that are open office hours where people can come in that are outside of that 90-day resettlement period that's traditionally been our focus area, to receive help with getting access to doctors or transportation, helping with their confusing benefits applications or renewing their benefits applications, those kinds of things that, we heard from immigrant communities and refugee communities that was an area that was lacking in Cincinnati. So our Catholic Charities Refugee Resettlement Program has been opening up to those opportunities. Another area that's, I'm not sure, extremely well known about in this kind of setting yet, Catholic Charities opened a language professionals department, and that's essentially a social enterprise that consists of contract interpreters. And so Catholic Charities will hire out interpreters to go to our English classes, help with other services that we provide within our agency. But then we also have contracts with other organizations. That's building a lot of bridges for us to work with the local schools and the police department, other agencies and law offices that are providing services to immigrants that need interpretation services. So we're able to build those bridges with these other organizations through our access to these interpreters. And that's all work that we're going to continue to do, along with the work that we've been doing historically for the last 100 years of our existence.
Thank you, Allison. Terry?
We at the Immigrant Welcome Center have been talking about this as part of our long-term strategic plan, and really trying to do more direct advocacy with the number of volunteers and others who seem very mobilized at this time, and building more coalitions of people and businesses and organizations that care about this issue. And so we are looking at state legislation in Indiana, people who lack work authorization or are here without documentation cannot get a driver's license. And we feel that's a public safety issue, and we have been advocating on that for years and not having any success with that. But we feel like if we can continue to build coalitions around other organizations and public safety officials, that we would be able to really look at those types of issues and help others. We are also working with some Democratic leaders in the Indiana State Senate on some other pro-immigration legislation, such as accepting identification cards that are not necessarily issued by municipalities, but are recognized by municipalities so that they do have photo ID that is widely recognized. And interested to talk about that if some of the other cities here have those ID cards and how that has worked in your municipalities.
Thanks, Terry.
Okay.
Father Chris?
Some of the priorities, I think gatherings like this are very, very important to bring groups of different experiences and different communities around. We're living in a changing landscape, and the way we supported immigrants 2 years ago is not the same as it is today, and it continues to change. It seems to be getting harsher and harsher. 2 years ago at the detention center in Brazil, Indiana, I could go and do face-to-face meetings with people in a clergy visit, and I could have them sign papers if I wanted it or they needed it signed. Not a problem at all. Today, they barely let you in the waiting room, and if you even raise your voice about anything, they'll call the police and have you escorted off. And so we're in a changing environment right now, and so meeting together and finding out what is working in different parts of the country, what's working at home, is very, very important. I think the accompaniment part is one of the things that we continue to do, providing that support, both emotional and spiritual support for our people. The biggest thing I think and the most pressing right now is just changing that narrative. So in November, when people go to the polls, they don't have in mind the false information about this rush on our borders, that immigrants are just coming from everywhere trying to get into our country and take advantage of every system that we have. But that the true story is out there, and that just changing that narrative so that the voters vote properly and informing their consciences with whatever faith background that they're in. We kind of share that same dignity of the human person in all faith backgrounds, and so voting our conscience to uphold that dignity is going to be very important coming up in the next few months. And so continuing the advocacy, accompaniment, changing the narrative is what I see are the most pressing things in the future. And the challenge is just being that there's continued opposition and continued small changes being made that are barely perceptible unless you're an immigration attorney that sees what's happening on a national level and the rights that are being eroded that most of us don't even see until we see the results of it in court cases and things. And so just continuing to meet and finding out from each other, learning from each other what the best way to promote is.
Thanks, Father Chris. Karina?
I remember that the day after the election, the only three overworked, underpaid staff at La Casita, we sat down and we cried. 2 years forward, we are 8 staff. Some full-time, some as needed, still overworked, still underpaid. And what we share with everybody is that when this is over, we're gonna be here standing strong and resisting. And then we are gonna be able to do what we are intended to do, which is build up our community in strength and empowerment, not looking at how usually we are being looked at as criminals, as poor people, as people that there needs to be pity on. No. So who we really are, very strong communities. So my hope in the horizon, and I know that this is what's gonna happen, is that all the accompaniments that we are able to do at La Casita, which is everything, you name it, we do it, and if we don't do it, we make it up. So all of it will have so much strength because it's based on the resiliency of everybody. looking at those mothers that have children with special care needs, being scared to death of deportation because they don't know if their very fragile child or children will survive her deportation. Crying with the teens who are, as if any of you work with immigrant or refugee teenagers, you know they are the holders of knowledge and truth. They are the interpreters. They are the ones that know it all at home. They are being the ones that are carrying on their shoulders the pain of the whole family, because maybe mom and dad don't understand what's going on really, but they do because they speak English. They are being harassed sometimes or indoctrinated at times. That's why so many of them didn't vote in the last election. So what's new with them, it will be for us, their elders, to be able to talk to them and share with them stories of wisdom so they can do better than us, so they can be better than us. Also, you know, with our kindergarten readiness program, I don't know if you know this, but in Jefferson County, in Louisville, only 1 out of 4 Latino kids is kindergarten ready. We are at the bottom. Even kids with special care needs are higher than us. So when this is over, believe me, the strength will be in building up these children, these families, and everybody. So in that way, we are not being seen down at something that people have to have pity on, but to see us who we really are. Because believe me, you can see sometimes some of these families, some of these moms, and I want to mention the women that are being affected more by domestic violence, more by sexual assault. You see them sometimes going through the affliction of illness, of abuse, bringing other women with ankle bracelets to see us so they can be helped as well. So that strength, that power will stay there, and we are going to use it for what we are supposed to do. That's how we need to build our cities, our country, in the strength of people. Because, my friends, as you all know, nobody is illegal in a stolen land.
Thank you, Karina. That's beautiful. Thank you for reminding us of that strength.
Yes.
And Antonio?
Our hope in the Immigrant and Refugee Law Center, and I think not only there, everyone that is here today, we all have the same wishes, desires, and hopes for our community. We want a good community, a community that represents what we really are as human beings. These are times of division, but at the same time, times of divisions bring people together, and unity makes a difference. So putting aside names and organizations, we're all here together as human beings, helping other human beings. And I think that's the hope that keeps us going every day. That's our dream, to work together, all of us, and even people that are not here today, but have the same wishes that we do, to help other human beings to succeed in these hard times and just grow as a community.
Absolutely. Thank you, Antonio. And I'll just share briefly with Faith in Indiana, one of the things I'm really excited about. We're working toward activating tens of thousands of voters across Indiana and focusing on people who are generally marginalized and not talked to by any campaign. So people of color, women, young people, and I have a number of teams of dreamers who really want to be at the center of that work and lead it and recognize that they can't vote, but the outcome of what happens in 2018 directly impacts them. And so that, for me, that's one of the exciting things on the horizon. And then also recognizing the challenges of so many of the folks who are leading our work in immigration are undocumented. So getting creative about who can they activate, who are people that they know who can vote, that they can bring into the fight with them. So both exciting and some daunting challenges as well. So I'm going to invite us into, we're here today to build relationship. So I'm going to actually invite all of you in a minute to stand up and move and find someone that you didn't know when you walked in today. Introduce yourself. And then I want you to share what was something you heard from this panel that resonated with you, with your experience, and what was something that you still have a question about. So we'll give you all about 3 minutes to find someone that you didn't know when you walked in today, get to know them, what was something you heard that you resonated with, and a question you still have.
Increíble todo lo que... Bueno, es increíble ver que pasen cosas así.
They have, it's their program, Catholic Charities Issues for Mark, and it's municipal, it's not municipal, it's community ID. It's got-
Community ID.
Yeah, it's got photo,
Y
address,
la
date of
preocupación es que
birth,
no
and
tienen,
the
ya
police department
perdieron
and other
toda
city
su
services in
vida
Cincinnati, well, in the
en
city
el
of
país.
Cincinnati, accepted.
Nosotros trabajamos mucho con mujeres de Guatemala
It's had good
y vienen de situaciones.
feedback.
Luego lo has vivido
Some
todas
other
las noches que
police
llegas a tu
departments
casa.
are
Por mucho que te digan, se te
accepted
olvida en
as
el
well as
camino a tu casa.
identification.
No dejas de llorarlo y vivirlo.
Technically,
de
the
Puebla.
sheriff's department,
Una hora y
the
media.
sheriffs are supposed to be accepting it as well, but we're not so
Sí.
sure they're actually following
Porque te estoy oyendo, porque ahorita que termine de hablar contigo voy a hablar con
Se te pega.
Driver's license or
Se me pega.
Photo
Sí,
ID.
no, cantamos. Y ya se me está quitando.
Ah, me encanta. No, yo
recognized by the city of Cincinnati,
That you are a resident of this, right, right.
Sí, no,
but
es que
it's
no,
not issued by
suena-
the city.
ajá.
We actually don't keep
Carlos,
the records.
Carlos está aquí, él también es de
So
Guatemala.
it protects us from and
También
protects
trabaja
the
con
people
nosotros,
who are
parte
going to
del
get the
equipo.
IDs from actually,
Y es de Guatemala, pero igual al final del día nos morimos de risa
saying,
porque él de repente has hecho unas palabras
I mean,
mexicanísimas.
I have the idea
Y
myself.
yo ando diciendo palabras de Guatemala
An
y
immigrant ID,
Right.
but it's a community ID.
sí,
So there's going to be a panel tomorrow about it with Peggy Fox from Mark and then Edwin Ortiz. He is, and maybe it's not a panel, maybe it's one of those breakout sessions in the afternoon.
Okay. I cannot be here
es
tomorrow,
que es
but
increíble.
local IDs, process and value. Great. Okay, I will see if,
We modeled ours off of Greensboro, South Carolina. They have an organization called Faith in Action, and that's how we modeled our program. And the city accepts it. It took a long time for us to get the city
Sí,
to
sí,
actually
sí, no.
take the ID.
and that was Greensboro?
Greensboro, South Carolina.
Y esa sí, esa gente
And
es,
the organization is called Faith
sí,
in
lo
Action.
dan todo. Sí, no.
Okay, good. I'll see, one of our board members is on a panel tomorrow. Here, this
Yo
one,
soy bien emocionado,
at
me siempre,
10:30.
por más que me haga el fuerte, acabo yo llego a mi casa y
Yes,
acabo
so I'm
llorando.
gonna ask Angela Adams is on our
Increíble.
board.
Nos pasó un día, mi esposa está por allá y no, es de Indiana, de hecho, nos conocemos en la universidad.
Wonderful.
Pero le conté, oye, esta familia no tiene de su casa, no tenía nada, ni un pan, era una bolsa de pan viejo, era todo lo que tenía. Entonces, digo, no sé qué hacer, tienen los chiquitos ahí. Pero nos fuimos a hacerles un súper, yo les dije que alguien había donado un súper y se lo llevamos. Bueno, al día siguiente, lo que le dimos, nos cocinó un pastel y ahí fue donde se me rompe, te das cuenta de lo que es el... No, es increíble. Y es lo mismo, gente dando a otra gente y son gente que está en necesidad, o sea. No, es horrible.
Love to do this.
Things might be a bit challenging for clergy
As far as just choosing
some
representatives.
rules as to which you can and can't do.
Well, not with immigration, I would not think.
On immigration issues.
Right.
Increíble.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that, Chris. I'm happy to read through this and look at some of those.
There's some resources.
Right. Right. This is exactly where we want to go, the citizen model.
Eso es increíble.
la más pocha, no le
Chema, y español ni siquiera es a veces hasta su cuarto idioma. Y es increíble.
Or give the attitude.
Yeah, I got one, thank you. That's great. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Awesome.
Oh, wonderful.
That gentleman over there in that
Good,
one
thank
with
you.
glasses. and
It's so
here,
hard because I want to say
that's the one you want
there's so much to say about this,
David.
and it's just find a few words to say everything we see every day. It's crazy.
And this lady.
Yeah, because yes, I was thinking about one story that one or two stories. There's and I don't get used to it. I'll take 8 stories, right? 3 times a week, every week. I'm like, I don't get used to it. The more you, it's just crazy.
Hi, how are you? Good, how are you?
All the great work.
Yeah, yeah.
You as well.
I've been lucky to work close to, oh my gosh, it's just never ending. It helps a lot because they hold the fort for so many years. I mean, they have, and they're still holding it, but
I'm going to invite you to take maybe 30 seconds and finish up the stimulating conversation that you're having and appreciate the person you've been talking to. And then begin to move back to our seats. Or if you have a question for the panel, you can begin to make your way to the front.
Made some connections with some of those immigration attorneys who are helping us with the family safety plan. If you're open to providing more immigration.
And that's really, I think, very characteristic of.
And so that
I knew
would
it.
be
Can you hear me?
1 or 2 in the afternoon.
it's never ending.
But being together it makes us feel stronger.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's. We didn't pick an easy fight.
I knew it would be hard to get you all to
It's the right one.
come back, but it was a risk I was willing to take. So again, I'll invite us to just return to our seats, and if you do have a question for the panel, to make your way forward. It's great to hear all the energy in the room. There's a lot of heart here, a lot of stories. And I would just invite the folks who are going to ask a question, if you can introduce yourself and say what city you're coming from, what organization, and then just clarify if you're directing your question to one particular person in the panel or if you're open to anyone answering the question.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you for recognizing me, and appreciate the panel and everybody who's participated so far today. It looks like it's going to be a great session for all of us. I'm Jim Nelson from Georgetown, Kentucky, which is just south or just north of Lexington, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Kentucky area. And we formed this community response coalition with a lot of help from the Catholic Charities as our financial home, and it's a very diverse group. But one of the questions, and it may not be for you, but I keep hearing you mentioning the person from the Mexican consulate. And one of the things that we need to know, that's you. Well, maybe I can ask you this personally offline, but we just need to know if maybe there is a network of people like yourself who we can direct our clients to when they have some issues they need to work about. So that's my question.
Terry, do you want to address that, or we can invite our friend from the consulate to come forward if she's willing?
Yeah. Mariana Torres.
Let's give her a hand. On the spot. Look at that.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm sorry. Well, yeah, it's we are 50 different consulates in this country, which is the biggest consular network in the world. I know I have worked with some of you, and I actually didn't met you, like Allison here. This is the first time, and we've been working for a year, I think. Well, there in Indianapolis, we cover 4 states, which is like most of a part of Indiana, then the whole state of Kentucky. So for the person who actually asked that question, you will have to come to me. We also cover most of the part of Ohio. The north part of Ohio is covered by the Detroit Mexican Consulate. And we also cover the south part of Illinois. The other part is covered by the Chicago Mexican Consulate. So you will actually have to go online to look at the different states that are covered by different consulates. It's 50, like I was telling you, but it's not like we have one in each state. Like in California, we have like 17 different Mexican consulates, and it all depends on the amount of Mexican community that is actually located in these states. But we have resources. That's what I always tell people. They might be limited right now because of everything that is happening in Mexico. We just went through elections, well, now things are kind of changing, but we still have resources. That's the main reason why the Mexican consulate is located where it is. So please take advantage of those. I always tell you that our only limitation is that those resources, like monetary resources, are just for Mexicans, like for the Mexican community, but we have some other resources that are for everyone. We have a 24/7 hotline, and anyone can call to that phone number. We have emergency phone lines, we work with organizations, we hire lawyers, and those resources are available for everyone. We have mobile consulates because not just in Indianapolis, we cover 282 counties in those 4 states that I told you, but it wouldn't be possible for us to try helping to all these people without the help of these amazing people that are here and all the organizations that are here. Sometimes I feel like we don't have enough resources, enough hands to help cases like Erica's. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misunderstandings about what a Mexican consulate can do. Even for Mexican people, they think that we can only issue passports and matriculas, but no, the case of Erica, he came to the Mexican consulate when it was already too late, but we could have done something, that's for sure. So if you know someone, please let them know that we are there. We are trying to use our networks, our social media, go to radio stations, TV stations, you name it. We've been trying to do as much as possible. By law, we can't advocate at the Senate buildings, but I don't care. Like, we do it anyway. What's the worst that can happen? And so yeah, if you need anything, I have a bunch of information with me in my car. I don't know where I parked because I was lost, but I have my presentation card, so if you need anything, please let me know, and I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. So if you have a question, you can come to the microphone in the front, so feel free to make your way up. If you're not able to come to the front, you could raise your hand, but we'll just form a line here. And again, if you can say your name, your city, organization, and then who your question is directed to.
I'm Jeff Richardson. I'm not really with an organization. I'm a member of the Northern Kentucky Justice and Peace Immigrant Subcommittee and also the Immigrant Dignity Coalition Deportation Subcommittee. And I'm working on developing a nonprofit bond fund for immigrants who've been granted bond, and maybe add a fund to help pay retainers for private attorneys, because we just don't have the capacity in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky in the pro bono community, and particularly with deportation cases, to just handle that. We had a big raid in December that overwhelmed. It was in Northern Kentucky, just overwhelmed what little infrastructure we had, and so we're all trying to work to make sure that we're ready. My question is to Karina, actually. We were working so hard to try to help people and prevent them from being deported, but are there, to your knowledge, networks or efforts to help people integrate back into, say, Guatemala? And particularly, I'm thinking teenagers who don't even really know anything about Guatemala, helping them setting them up in some way so that they are not, lost and dragged into things that we hope they aren't dragged into.
I am not sure I understand your question. I'm sorry.
We all are helping people who are here
Yes.
as
yes.
best as we can.
Mhm.
When we fail and they're deported to Guatemala,
I see.
are there, and I'm not asking about you in particular, but are you aware of organizations or efforts to help that person that is being sent back to Guatemala, and particularly those who don't really even know Guatemala, to integrate there safely and successfully?
Not that I know of anybody here from the base. I am not acquainted with any, but that's a great idea, actually. Thank you.
I think I
Oh,
saw Lisa Coop's hand went up.
Kids in Need of Defense, KIND actually has a repatriation program that's, not huge, but it's at least the beginnings of an effort to try and assist repatriated children, and I think to
So it sounds like the name of the organization is KIND, Kids in Need of Repatriation? In Need of Defense. Okay.
But the prevention work that is being done is to explain the youth, the kids, their rights, and try to support so their family create a safety plan in case of the situation. But thank you for your great question, and that's a great idea for the next accompaniment.
Is it related to the, okay.
I'm from Guatemala also, and what we've been trying to do, or at least I've been trying to do in Lexington, is to link our kids first with the consulate, because they have to be registered. If they're American citizens, they need to be registered in the consulate in Guatemala, the Guatemalan consulate, because if they're not registered, then they won't have the right to all of the services, to school, to everything else. So that's of primary importance, is to connect them with our consulates. The second thing is that those of us that have family in Guatemala, we try to link them up with organizations and with family members that can look out for them. It could be a parish priest, it could be just people that we know that are willing to try and gather them back into the fold. What usually happens is that there's family members there that are helping, but it is sometimes a very violent region that they might be going back to, and so we try to get them to resettle somewhere else.
Thank you so much. Next. Oh, got one microphone.
As a follow-up on that too, not specifically in Guatemala, but I did some work at the Kino Border Initiative in Nogales, which is a Jesuit-run repatriation organization, but in Mexico, so not Guatemala. So my name is Sam Centellas. I work at La Casa de Amistad. We're the Youth and Latino Community Center in South Bend, Indiana. So my question about mobilizing, and it's kind of for everybody on the board or anybody here as well to have these conversations. We talk a lot about trying to mobilize our immigrant communities to be more involved in advocacy and action. We also talk a lot about mobilizing what we call allies, right? And a lot of times our allies, we tend to think people who are going to be natural allies, right? So Caucasians that are extreme left, or any of those different groups of people, right? And so my challenge has been, when we're doing a lot of rallies and programs, activities, and speaking programs like this, we're speaking to the choir, right? We're all allies. We're all here in the same boat, right? The stories you shared today, we've all seen those in our communities or close to. How do we talk to the middle, right? How are we mobilizing the middle? So what I see a lot happening is the left, we're all kind of shelling up and getting ready to lob a bomb over to the right side and see if it works. But there's this whole group in the middle that we're struggling, how do we reach them? Whether it's through media, through social activities, through volunteering, but how do we mobilize the middle is my question.
So I'm going to show off a little bit. David Horvath and Tricia Loisidel are here, and both of them belong to Louisville Standing Up for Social Justice and the Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Justice. And I believe that they've done wonderful work in trying to talk to the middle and creating, that awareness, within our white allies. So I would invite anybody to talk to them. They are just amazing.
And let's give them a hand. Yeah. And I might just add to that. So with Faith in Indiana and a number of different organizations across the country, we've participated in this race class narrative study with an organization called Demos. And really thinking about, what are the things that would bring us together, and studying what is the breakdown of people who agree with us or don't on a variety of issues. And what's been really fascinating to me is that we found in Indiana some of the issues we organize around. So it's beyond immigration to things like healthcare and pre-K and education. There's only 22% of the people in our state who disagree with us on everything, which is actually pretty small. And there's like a 40% group in the middle who we would call the persuadables, that when they were asked these different questions, they would say like, oh yeah, that sounds good, or oh yeah, that makes sense, even when they were contradictory ideas. So there's really, the issue at hand that we're seeing is that there's a whole group of people who are just repeating what they're hearing. So if the messages they're hearing more are hate and fear, that's what they'll repeat. But if the messages that they're hearing are love, inclusion, belonging, and people move to protect their families, it's something that a lot of people do, it's really common, then they would just repeat what they hear. And so we've been really trying to lead with values when we're talking to folks, that we found it's really effective when we think about what are the things that unite us. Well, everybody cares about their families. Like, that's just a really commonly held belief. Leading with that and really uniting around those things has been something that it seemed to draw people in. And we'll see when we use some of this language and messaging in our campaign this fall how effective that is. But it's been really interesting to think about.
I'd like to say mention something about a program that I heard Bishop Cousins uses up in Minnesota. He's one of the bishops in Minneapolis, and he does DACA talks. And so he takes a couple of youth that have DACA, and he goes around to different parishes and just tells their stories. And so he goes to the suburban parishes that don't have an immigrant community, goes to different areas, and just sharing the stories to the people, to the ones who are probably not on the camps, or the ones that are already in the movement, just to share their stories. It's not something I've been able to start yet in Indianapolis, but would love to do that. And so just having DACA talks, going around sharing stories.
Got one more response? Sure.
Recently, I visited St. Louis, Missouri, and the International Institute of St. Louis there also has been doing and requested to do a lot more community presentations similar to what we do at the Immigrant Welcome Center. But what they have done is taken this newfound volunteer base and said, we're trying to reach people who may not, or maybe the persuadable, the 40% in there who don't have strong opinions. And so they had done a lot of work in trying to find these groups through civic groups, through places of worship, and businesses, and those connections made by their volunteers. And then they developed an entire PowerPoint and then offered training programs to be able to reach more people in the St. Louis area who might think, why do I care? I'm not an immigrant. But it just seems like there's so many more people now who are paying attention, unfortunately, because of the horrendous acts that are happening. So I thought that was a great idea, and that's something I'm bringing back to Indianapolis, is to see if we can get more volunteers out there in the community doing PowerPoint presentations on immigrants' wonderful contributions to Indianapolis, and also just to be able to have a community conversation about immigration.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry. And thanks for that question, Sam. I really hope that that's a question we can continue to engage throughout this event. I know a lot of us are asking the same thing back home. So.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Kennedy. I currently work with the Immigrant and Refugee Law Center in Cincinnati. Today, I've heard a lot of talk about sharing stories, about unifying communities and things of that nature, but I haven't heard any talk about the arts or social media. And I have both a proposal and a question for everyone in the room. I think that with such a vibrant arts community that we have, especially in Cincinnati, one of the things that we could easily do, both as a group, individually in our different areas, is reach out to the families that we serve and that we help and create almost an online grassroots campaign sharing arts from immigrants, sharing their stories, sharing music, sharing poems, sharing short stories, sharing whatever form of art they may have. Because especially today, we've seen social media become weaponized by certain factors of the government, including the president, to try and attack both individuals and to try and attack other governments and organizations. And I think that it's important that we take that back. And I'm wondering if anyone in the room would be interested in trying to work with me to create that kind of social network, and also if both the panel and people in the room think that that would work.
Can I? I'm going to put in a little bit of a shameless plug. I think this is a great idea, and it's something that there's a organization in Columbus called CRIS. They're a resettlement agency, and a couple of years, well, 2 years ago now, they commissioned artwork from a bunch of different community artists who were inspired by stories of refugees, and they did a documentary about it. It's called Crossing Borders, and right now the Freedom Center is hosting the exhibit and the documentary. So I encourage you to take your friends and family and go on Saturdays and see the documentary, look at the artwork. It's very inspiring and very impactful, and that's like a great segue into other projects like that too, I think.
Antonio, did you want to?
No, I'm lucky enough to work with Kevin, and that's a conversation that we had before. And social media, I mean, all of us have one of these in our hand, and kids, and no matter the language, you see some of these families that just came from Guatemala that barely speak Spanish, but they have a cell phone. So if each one of us do our part and share those stories and find facts that are real, because there's also a lot of misinformation in the media. But we'll find a family member, we'll find somebody that just watches one TV station and they believe that that's the reality of the country. So we need to speak up, because sometimes we're afraid, and I see it's scary times to talk. Sometimes you don't want to bring the conversation all the time, but it's there. And I think it's a topic that we avoid, but we need to talk about it. We need to share stories. We need to have conversations, good conversations with people about it.
A couple things that come to mind for me. We have our Episcopal Cathedral in Indianapolis. To me, this was like a creative, artistic response. They took the Jesus, Mary, and Joseph from their nativity display and actually put it out on the lawn of their cathedral in a cage as like a public expression of, every family is holy. And this was something that ended up going viral internationally, and it was just this creative idea of how to express what they were feeling and the way that they wanted to support the families within their congregation and beyond. So to me, that really, the impact of that was huge. And beyond that, we're actually going to pilot this project with social media and actually doing organizing through direct messaging and having people talk to their peers about dog whistles, about the narratives that are being used to really criminalize our neighbors. And so I'm really interested. It's something we haven't done before, but we're going to have sets of leaders talk to their 25 friends and have this conversation and try to really take things a little bit deeper than your everyday Facebook conversation and see if that does have an impact. So I'm really interested to see how that turns out. Thank you for the question. I think this will be our last question. Thank you.
I'm Mary Aguilera. I work for Cincinnati Public. I'm a structural assistant for the Spanish Immersion Program, AMI. And working with native English and native Spanish speakers, I see the same issues. I see families separated because they're homeless, and I see families separated because they're immigrants. I see people that are victims of gun violence because they're immigrants, and they're victims of gun violence because, of where they live. Or, and for me, I'm on the Ohio Coordinating Committee for the Poor People's Campaign. And all these issues that we've been talking here, I see these families, they're all in survival mode. Well, we're all in survival mode. And we have to see the connections of the policies that are keeping people poor are also affecting poor immigrants. And as people tell their stories, a big part of the Poor People's Campaign is everyone telling their stories. And when everyone starts to tell the stories about family separation, they start to see how they're linked. And I feel like we have to take it to another level to be able to fix everything at the top, so we'll trickle down to all the issues here. And
Did you
if
have
that makes sense.
Sorry, do you have a question for the panel?
So do you see that happening? Do you see the white allies that are coming to help the separation of the immigrants that are separated from their families? Do you see them making the connection of families that are separated because they're homeless or things like that? Do you see that helping? Do you see those connections within the community? Does that make sense?
Anybody want to address that question?
Well, so Catholic Charities does a lot of work with hunger and poverty and trying to help people get raised up out of poverty. And I'm not sure that we've actually, and this is probably, I'm sorry if, Dan, if you don't agree with me, a criticism of our organization that we don't connect those two extremely well. And I see your point, and I think it's a really good point. And it kind of turns the narrative on the head, too. I mean, the administration was saying, well, it's okay that we're separating families at the border because they're getting charged with crimes. First of all, it's a misdemeanor to cross the border without documentation. Right. Maximum penalty is 6 months in jail. Maximum penalty is 6 months in jail. And, turning on the head to say, people are getting separated because of family separation, and the government's trying to say it's all about criminality, which really isn't the case, but tying it in more with homelessness and how to connect it to people here on a more personal level, I think is a really, really good point, and it's something that I think we could take back from that too.
Go ahead.
And if I may also say, one of the sometimes barriers that we have as a social justice movement is that we think only this or the other. But I think that the minute one of us is oppressed or is being victimized by injustice, all of us are. So, how do we bring also to the light, but also recognizing as well that usually people that have been minoritized in general, people from the global majority are the ones that are more affected by these situations.
Thank you. We're actually going to take one more question. We've got a person persevering up here. Hi. Go for it.
Hi, my name is Elsa Kennedy. I am a local of Cincinnati. I'm a musician and artist and poet and activist. I am queer, I am a female, and I have PTSD. And all of those things combined have given me, combined with my privilege as a white cisgender female, have given me what I feel like is a unique opportunity. I had the privilege to get treatment and get support with the struggles I was experiencing, and I have come out on the other side. And one of the biggest questions I've had throughout this is whether or not there are adequate resources or any resources at all specifically for young queer immigrants. I know just in my community, most LGBTQ young people are very uncomfortable going to faith-based organizations for obvious reasons. And add that to being an immigrant with all the other traumas that they're experiencing. Is there a need for someone or like some organization to come in like that has no faith affiliation? Like is there opportunities for these young people, especially queer young people, to even just have a community or like mental health support or have fun? Because I feel like a big thing that's lacking probably for young, scared people who feel terrified all the time, especially if they're queer, you can't have fun. Fun is a part of safety and a part of being able to have the resilience to, at the end of the trauma, come out and come out at least able to heal. So that's sort of my question.
And that is so important. My sister, thank you so much for bringing it forward. It's so important to acknowledge it and recognize it. We had this year our second Latinx Pride at La Casita. Is the only one in Kentucky, unfortunately. And we are very intentional in making our space welcoming for everybody, because our population is still very young, in the sense that in the last 15 years, 20 years, it is that we have seen more immigrants. The very brave youth that have come forward and supported the Latinx Pride movement, there are very few of them. I can tell you that I know a lot of women that have survived domestic violence and sexual assault that were forced to be married, that they identify themselves in secret, to be lesbian or bisexual or transgender, but they cannot come out of the closet because of their situation, religious and why not. But as I said previously, I think that the youth, you all are going to save us, because you are opening all those doors. And I tell you about our Latinx LGBTQ, they are doing the best they can. They are their group is very little, but they are very powerful.
Thank you for your question. And I just want to appreciate again Karina, Antonio, Allison, Terry, Father Chris, for your presence and your sharing, and each of you that brought forward questions. I know we'll continue to engage these questions as we go into lunch and our afternoon sessions. Thank you.